document.
We are live. We're live.
Perfect. Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Got it. Okay.
Alrighty. And then we will, as the agenda was set, to go through that document and review our possible additions or modifications to the village design guidelines, with the environmental lens. So good evening, everyone just joining. We are live on YouTube. This meeting will be recorded and viewable by our residents. So here we go. I believe this is everyone we're going to have tonight. Might have one more member joining us. But again, we will have our trustee report and then go ahead and proceed to the document to work on that. I will act as the scribe for the group, so I will pull the document up and have it, take notes on everyone's suggestions, and everyone can direct me accordingly. So,
thank you.
All right. Good evening. For my trustee report, there's a lot going on in the village environmentally, but I want to keep it very short because I know we have this hour. In short, the Mather Northwell project has been moved to the planning board public hearing for the Mather Northwell master plan project has been moved to March 3rd. It's a Thursday at 6 o'clock with the public hearing starting at 6:30. It was postponed because Mather had not done the postings or mailings for the public hearing. And so, it's a significant project. I know the CAC has shown interest in it because of the many acres of woodland that is proposed to be removed in, for a parking lot. And so, if you have any specific questions, I can take care of a couple that if I'm able to, but otherwise I would just encourage everyone to attend that public hearing. Where they will give a presentation, and anything that is unclear or anything that you want to share, you will be able to at that time, and or by emailing Cindy Suarez at the planning department.
May I ask one question?
Sure.
Because we've been busy with this project this week. Just, I know an environmental assessment was completed. We're unable to obtain it because Cindy Suarez is out until, I guess she should have been back yesterday, but we're still unable to obtain it. Does anyone have access to it or a copy of it? Or
I emailed our special attorney for the planning department, and she said that the environmental assessment, which is the SECRA, is still in process. It has not been completed. They're still working on that. So any questions specifically about the status of that and how the any aspects of the project would affect the environmental report and how that might reflect, I would say bring that definitely to the board meeting or to the planning board meeting for the public hearing, because they will have much more specific answers than I can give you here. I tried to do some research on SECRA, and I think I have to sit down with the attorney and sorry?
With a C? Sorry, I'm just writing it out with the letter C.
S-E-Q-R.
S-E-Q-R.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, there's, I encourage everyone to, in this committee, anyone watching and anybody who in the village to attend that virtual public hearing. You can attend it from the comfort of your own home and do ask questions, make comments, and it's a significant project. Otherwise, oh, go ahead.
6:30.
What time is that meeting?
6:30.
6:30. Just like
on the 3rd of March?
Yeah, March 3rd. It's virtual. If you go to portjeff.com/virtual meetings, then you will be able to find that link. And there's one document there right now that's that shows the general master plan, but to really get an understanding of what that looks like on the ground itself, you'll see that in their presentation and be able to respond in any way you wish. Otherwise, obviously the Port Jefferson Bluff, the bluff over the, under the catering hall and the tennis courts continues to be a big issue. There was just a presentation by the engineers that are working on that project this afternoon at the village board meeting. You can view that online at any time. That's also on our YouTube channel where this will be viewable as well. And so that will give you, some updates. I had some questions I got to ask them. I'm sure you can email the village with any questions, and we'll continue to discuss this at board meetings. But it is a very large, complex issue. And, if the CIC wants to organize any, comment or anything, I would imagine doing either having organized comment or individual, viewing and comment at the public hearing in March. The Board of Trustees public meeting in March. I've had a very long day. Kelly.
Was this meeting about the bluff largely informational, not something that moved forward a particular remedy? Was it just, I was just curious since I hadn't had a chance to see it yet.
It was looking at sort of I really actually appreciated how much it spoke about the future of the village vis-a-vis climate change. It was good to hear those words being used over and over again. It was not good to see the facts and figures of what is being projected for our area. That ship has sailed and is on its way. So we're looking at by 2050 about a foot of sea level rise. And so that, while it might not sound like a ton, will enormously affect our seaside village, our waterside village here. And then they're saying by the end of the century, so another 50 years, between 3 and 6 feet of sea level rise. And so it was definitely, massive. And then by another figure that was quite shocking was that we have experienced historically about 45 inches of rainfall every year. And then now they're projecting that, and we're already getting close to experiencing between 70 and 75 inches of rainfall per year, with the greater extent of increase being experienced in large storms. So not like we're going to become Seattle, but rather we're just going to have more of those 8-inch rainfalls, they're projecting. So all of this was very bad yet good to hear. It was good to have it discussed as the grand scheme of the village and management and decision making, but also terrifying, truly terrifying. So this is our reality though, and this is why groups like us meet to talk about the environmental impacts of things in the village here and what we can do proactively and what we can do as we move forward. I'm gonna I'll take a couple of questions and then I want the group.
Which government agencies are involved in the bluff situation?
So for the bottom, so there's 2 walls being proposed, a toe wall, which is within DEC jurisdiction. And then the upper wall, the village has just submitted a letter of non-jurisdiction saying that, to the DEC that, we believe this is not in your jurisdiction because it's not in that tidal wetland zone. It's so elevated from the beach. And so, but the toe wall, also the Army Corps of Engineers is involved in this. Essentially the permit that was submitted for the optimal plan by the village was rejected by the DEC. And we were told to, instead of putting a, say, 24-foot line wall, to put a, it was decreased to 14 feet. We were permitted, to do instead, and a shorter wall and fewer plantings. So, that's essentially the project that is being proposed is a less robust version of what ideally would go in there to retain this bluff. And I encourage everyone to watch the meeting, from this afternoon. It's very informational. I don't want to sway your opinions one way or the other, but it's very interesting to hear the engineer explain all this, and there's some neat graphics and all.
Sorry, Rebecca, is on the main page.
The meeting
of
would be
the
on, if
village?
you go to Port Jefferson Village's YouTube page.
Yeah,
So if you go
okay.
to, YouTube Port Jefferson Village and you'll see this meeting and then many other meetings, which are, sometimes I'll throw something on in the background instead of a podcast or, whatever it is. So just keep on the up and up.
You said, sorry, that there were written materials, but I wasn't able to find them. Was that in the meeting notes of one of these meetings?
Written materials for what?
About the bluff. Sorry, I didn't know if there were any sort of written documents about the bluff where we might find those.
There is a whole page now dedicated. I think if you go to portjeff.com again, it's somewhere in there. It's here, let me pull it up for you real quick.
Yeah, I can also poke around. I didn't know if it. I didn't see anything under country club. It's probably under village info.
No,
or something.
yeah, it's kind of let's see, village info, no, government, no, news, recreation.
You can always maybe use the search function.
Yeah, I was just looking for that. I want to say it.
I
might
got
even-
it. Yeah, that turns up.
Yeah, East Beach Bluff
Yep.
information.
Okay, I see it. Thank you.
Perfect. So yeah, portjeff.com/East Beach Bluff information. And you could see the stabilization plan there. All right. Any other last quick questions before I turn it over to y'all? Okay, seeing none. I will pull up the document. Again, for anyone viewing the CAC, the Conservation Advisory Council, which meeting this is, has been working on putting together amendments, additions to the Port Jefferson Village architectural guidelines and building design guidelines document, which currently does not have any green or landscaping features in it. And as more modern, as many have known for a long time, but more modernly accepted is the fact that green building, but also green design, landscape design is very important in new projects. And so this is something, a document that goes into the hands of every developer, builder, anyone who wants to do a significant project in Port Jefferson will get these. And so, the aim is to advise them from square one that they should be doing green building, thinking about their landscape in a ecological sense as opposed to just an aesthetic one, and beyond. So that is the work that has been going on here. I'm pulling up a document now that is that was created collectively by the group between during and between meetings, and they are going to move through and discuss as we move this closer to a practicable end of the work. So there we go. Okay, can everyone see this?
Yes.
Let's see, go to Zoom. Okay. All right. So thank you, Kelly, for putting this together. All right. So do we have our who wants to lead the committee through this? Kelly?
Well, I've got, yeah, in reading through various people's comments, and even mine that starts with sort of a question, which is, how do we define a preference, the word preference for native, or how do we more closely kind of define guidelines that would reach our goals while working within the kind of flexible frameworks. And because I see, various people putting in really insightful suggestions for things to add, or for things like Susan, I was just reading what you had put in about, concerns about the health of trees in certain urban areas. So I was just it looks as though we're all kind of circling around some of the same issues. And I was just wondering if others felt that in terms of reading through the all of our different comments.
I'm reading it now. I haven't read it before, so.
Yeah, I mean, in my read through it, Kelly, I agree with what you're saying there. And so do we, is there a way, is there a first step that you propose taking?
Well, I was just wondering, because this was also something in our last meeting, Heather, that you had brought up was, how do we define the preferences? And I was just wondering if after all of the suggestions that we've made, if anyone can take a stab at wanting to offer a potential preference or definitional frameworks for in the existing architectural guides, there is a set aside for a certain percentage of green space. Nothing more is said about that. And that's really what we're here to try and one of the things that we're trying to, for instance, trying to make less vague.
I wonder if there might be some here that are actually maybe easy wins or whatever, easy ones to start with. Like I'm looking down to charging stations for electric vehicles. That's kind of binary, like you either have a charging station or you don't. So maybe, and I think for lighting, I really like their suggestion for it to be dark skies compliant. Because again, that's like, you're either compliant or you're not compliant. So, that seems like an easier one.
Sure.
So do we maybe want to go through and pick out, like, sort of go bit by bit and see which ones are sort of these binary yes, no, and make a list of those that, just to begin with?
I think we should, because that's just I think that's going to make it easier for us before we get into the ones where we're dealing with, should be predominantly X% whatever, and that becomes a little harder. But I feel like the charging stations was a binary yes, no, and the dark skies compliant were two that I saw off the top of the bat, which at least are well-defined asks, I guess. Well,
Sure. And Heather, also yours about the window coatings for birds.
Yeah, so that was really, I know intimately. So I think that might be in the next year. It's just that it's hard. There's not a compliant, not compliant in that sense. Some things are going to be more bird friendly or less. So it's a little bit harder to define how bird friendly is bird friendly enough. But I agree with you that at least maybe I don't know how I worded it, but maybe follows ABC's guidelines for how to put it there. Actually, I think it's a little bit up. Yeah, a little bit. There we go. Where to put it?
Require new buildings to abide by the American Bird.
Okay, so there's there are ordinances in there. I'd have to. So that is. I agree with you. That's kind of more binary. I couldn't think of how it was worded.
All right. So do we want to go from the top and sort of just get a breath of what, for everyone to get?
Yeah, start at the top.
And there's probably, I just think that there might be a collection of these that all fall under the rubric of like landscaping stuff.
Exactly. Thank you, Heather. That was really what I was trying to get at, that there are a number of landscaping specific ones that all relate to one another, but don't end up still as they are, end up with the kind of language that we need.
Okay, so maybe as we go through, we can move and group things. And so another conversation will be all about, how to word, what to pull out for the landscaping. And then we'll have these other aspects that are being covered by.
Yeah, I think we should separate out the landscaping ones and the non-landscaping ones, because the landscaping ones, I think ultimately will kind of end up in one, it to some extent or another end up in the same bullet point. And I don't know if we were to set aside the landscaping ones just for a second. We've got landscaping. I wonder if there are any other non-landscaping ones. We've got
recycling collection.
There's one on the different roof. There's a bullet on the different type of roof.
Renewable
a white
energy
roof or a solar roof.
Right.
That's it. So roofing is like one. Roofing could be one.
There is.
Yeah.
Are we still going from the
Landscaping,
top? Are we
roofing.
just?
I'm
are
just
we
wondering if we
hitting
can
them-
set aside the landscaping ones, because those feel like they have, like those have to be, because they're probably scattered throughout. And so somehow we need to, we
My
might want to
eyeballs
delete
are
all the
swishing around.
non-landscaping ones and then squish
Sure.
the landscaping ones together, because they're all kind of to a theme, you know what I mean?
Agreed.
Because I think that they probably ended up kind of scattered. So I was just thinking of the other ones that were kind of non-landscaping that,
Stormwater runoff is another one that should be separate.
Yeah. storm-
yeah.
So would a second category maybe be building infrastructure?
Yeah, that's fair. Building infrastructure, yeah.
The actual construction, that is when the construction is occurring, would that fall under building infrastructure?
Which ones are those? Is that those further down?
I popped one in. It wasn't my idea. I can't take credit. I was asking my daughter who works in sustainability, and she said one thing she gets on their case about is that when the construction is actually happening, they can't allow any particulate matter. If they want to be LEED certified, for example, depending on what category, they can't allow any particulate matter to escape. So they actually have to, build some kind of a temporary construction so that there's no runoff, so that the particulate matter doesn't end up in the neighborhood, and a variety of other things from fumes to fuels.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
So that's
we-
during construction.
Oh,
So
would that be
maybe during construction, or it could be its own, I don't know,
yeah.
subject.
Could that be civil engineering
construction.
maybe? Civil
I
engineering?
don't know if it would fall, or just engineer or construction. It's during the project's creation.
I'm just looking for that on here, Amal.
Like the erosion control, maybe? Is that the one?
Yep.
that would be-
Mats beneath cars parked on construction site. Oh yeah, she said, so that was interesting. That every vehicle on the site has to have something beneath it, so that when it enters and exits, it doesn't trail its debris.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Okay, so we could try a during construction category.
And if that's something you'd like to include, I can ask her for the gazillion of details that there's quite
Yeah.
a lot involved. This was, what we did was come up with, I just said, I had a list and she had a list, and I said, what if we pick the 5, most important things? Because I didn't know how long you wanted our lists to run.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think right now what the group is doing is categorizing. And then once it's broken into categories, maybe it's easier to look and see of the suggestions that have been made, which ones seem like the highest priorities, which ones seem like the most important, and how do those intersect?
This one with permeable hardscaping and bioswales, we can probably move that to landscaping. Sorry, that kind of goes. That's why I was thinking it might be, yeah, we can pull them all together, because it probably
It should be in landscaping.
Right. And I just misspoke a moment ago. Yeah, we're kind of looking for the intersection of priorities and how attainable of an ask the things are. And so I think once we categorize, we can have those suggestions. So reuse of building materials, that would be
infrastructure, I guess.
yeah. It mentions
Or-
landscaping, gardening, but maybe we'll copy this over to the landscaping, and we'll just put reuse of maybe reuse or preservation of green, of trees, shrubs, anything on site.
I wonder if this had to do with like the actual carbon footprint of the building materials themselves, which might be kind of a hard ask, just because I imagine that their engineering is it's kind of it's kind of off the shelf in some sense. I don't know that they would want to engineer with recycled materials just for structural stability.
Right. So maybe if we don't think, so what, anyway, we keep diving in and getting excited about things. I wonder if reuse or sort of recycling, which could take the form of, donating materials to places like Habitat for Humanity Restore, or,
A good idea.
putting it into like so instead of just demoing.
I see what you're saying. It's like what I was thinking in terms of what you're building, but I think what you're talking about is what you're tearing down, which is I get it. I misunderstood.
Right.
Right.
I think in a homeowner's world, we are often looking to see, okay, I already have this thing, how can I reuse it? But, the architects and the engineers are not looking to design and plan around existing, much of anything existing, especially with these big projects. But I think, looking at how can we guide them to do something, instead of just putting it all in the landfill, is there something else that can be done with these still usable building materials or recyclable building materials?
Particularly because I imagine a lot of those building materials, the big concrete parts could actually maybe be used to shore up, some of the marine walls. Like sometimes you would end up with like concrete debris, or what a lovely opportunity to take tear down debris that as long as it's not causing a pollution problem. But I think if it's, sometimes you're just looking for fill, you know what I mean? That they kind of in the marina.
Well, and to that, guys, I seem to recall the town of Brookhaven has a vested interest in construction debris being diverted from the landfill.
Mm-hmm.
And the town of Brookhaven, Ed Romaine had even done a pilot where they had to raise a house in the town of Brookhaven. And it was done as a kind of pilot to show that kind of deconstruction, when you're clearing a lot for new construction, can be done with zero waste going to the landfill. So the only reason I'm bringing that up is that this is something that the town of Brookhaven may have very specific language, and that people working within the town of, or building within the town of Brookhaven may at least have some familiarity.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You have to be careful about chemicals leaching out as well.
Yes.
Okay, so I've added that note that this is something that we might find useful language in the documents by town of Brookhaven. Shall we keep going and organizing? So I see Susan has a.
Actually, I think Susan's stuff might all go
It's all in
to the landscaping.
landscape. Yeah.
Leaf blowers. What did you write, Susan?
I know.
I hate leaf blowers. That's what I hate most.
Right.
God.
Well, I think as much as I echo your sentiments, I don't know how much in a design guide we're going to be.
No, it's control of the landscape, really.
Sure. So yeah, I think maintenance is sort of a separate issue from what we're working on here. As much as I think everybody on this meeting would like, to not hear gas leaf blowers anymore, that's probably a different effort.
Noise ordinance issue.
Yes, it's noise ordinance. It's some municipalities have passed code, regarding those, but it's a whole nother.
So we might actually be down to the landscaping ones, or at least maybe that's the big chunk, but I think it was useful to collate them because I think they're all getting kind of similar ideas.
Sure. So we have landscaping, building infrastructure, and then we have during construction, which I might reuse. This might be sort of a during construction.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. And did we miss anybody down here? Right. So do we want to go backwards so that the landscaping is the last sort of big thing that we tackle?
Sure.
Or do you want to start with it?
Well,
Okay.
actually, in some ways, the landscaping one might be the one that would most benefit from our real-time debate here. Some of the other stuff that are simpler, actually, we might be able to do a bit more asynchronously, but the landscaping is is the beast of it, I think.
Sure, sure. Well, I guess that's why I'm wondering if we sort of quickly exercise, prioritization and looking at, these things, then we'll spend the rest of the time, on running the clock out on the landscaping. Because I think we'll feel like we've accomplished something in the document, and which you should already feel like that because we have these great pages of suggestions. But I wonder, if we sort of look at the infrastructure and during construction and say, what are the suggestions that are the highest priorities, and then which ones are the lower priorities, and then have a conversation about which ones we think are small asks and which ones are big asks, if that makes sense.
So I would just to throw something out there for discussion purposes, the recycling and composting. For me personally, I would prioritize that lower than some of the other things, just because
I agree.
it's very up to the whims of the recycling market, and
Right.
and it could, I don't know, it's not a one and done. It kind of depends on the market being there and people participating sometimes, whereas these other things are like the win is right up front and it doesn't require people to continue participating.
Right. And it can't be changed. It's more when it's there, it's there.
Want to say, yeah.
Okay, so then we might move recycling to a lower priority. Let's put it down here for now.
Because I definitely do feel like people that are going to recycle will recycle there's a marginal bit, but it's just those people who are kind of put off by the inconvenience. So it's, I think the green roofing, I don't know. Yeah. In terms of allow for renewable, is that to say that we would allow them to put solar panels on these big projects? Or that I guess I'm not sure who would allow who would say no to renewable energy, I guess is saying, or are we saying that we would encourage them to put solar panels on it?
So if it read encourage.
Yeah, maybe I didn't know if there were rules. Yeah. Okay. So encourage renewables or energy reduction. I like that.
Kelly, was that the spirit of that?
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
And I think I like the way that this is written too, because you're saying you got to do, we're really encouraging you to do something with the roof, whether it's simply painting it white, which is sort of the lowest hanging fruit, all that requires is painting, or you could do, green roofing, or you could do solar panels, but something other than just the black tar roof. So I think we agree that it's a small, it could be a small ask, and how does it prioritize?
So one question about the solar panels, are there architectural guidelines for or against solar panels? Or do they speak at all? Could anybody put any, I don't know if there are rules against solar panels or encouraging at the building level.
Yeah, there's surely code, but that's sort of I think it's a state code compliance. There's surely not a lot that discourages solar panels. It's just, if you're putting solar panels, they have to, the wiring has to be a certain way. It has to, attach to the roof in a certain way, but that's not something that we have to address because that's a existing code.
I was just thinking aesthetically, I know, I mean, we have solar panels, but I know that not everyone in the village is a fan of the aesthetics. And I didn't know whether to preserve the, I don't know, historic look of the blah, blah, blah. I haven't read through the building codes. So they're not being there's no comment on the aesthetics of them that we would be running up against if we were to encourage them to put panels on.
No, I don't think so. And two, a lot of these projects are pretty high up, and the birds would have the opinion of the solar.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we weren't creating contradictions where one part of the code was like, don't put solar panels on it, and the other part of the code saying put solar panels on it.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good point, Heather. But as Rebecca was mentioning, one of the reasons why these kinds of apartment or commercial developments are almost the ideal place for solar panels is that they're not going to be obstructed by trees because they're so high up, and the aesthetics of them are not going to be really visible. You can have all kinds of little false walls that hide them, but still take full advantage of the sun.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. I just didn't want to
No, no, I
create sort of
agree.
conflict within the code.
No, it's a good thinking forward. All right, so we have improved stormwater runoff management. I know that stormwater runoff is actually something that's greatly being addressed by our village code. And our village, planning department is really looking to tighten up on this because of everything we've seen happening in the last couple of years, especially, with everybody's runoff just going to Main Street or Oakwood or, whatever street it is, and creating rivers and just a lot of destruction. So from a village perspective, I would almost say that we don't need to speak about stormwater runoff unless perhaps it is to encourage green infrastructure as a response to the your water retention, which would be bioswales and rain gardens and things that we've seen elsewhere in this document.
I agree that I would
think mostly they use-
Oh, sorry, Kelly.
No, it was during it. Mostly they use hay bales. I mean, that's what they've always used. Mary, remember on Brook Road,
Right.
issue there? Hay bales are the feature that what they use as I guess, an inexpensive option. It seems to work.
Well, I think that isn't that in a short term. So
Yeah, during construction.
during construction. Okay, so interesting. So you're interpreting this as a during construction.
Because because you get a lot of, you don't have any plantings or anything. You've got the raw earth, you've got rain coming down, and it all flows down to the street. So you need something to trap it. And so usually it's hay bales that are put down.
Right.
Oh, so we have to break this out. First, there's the construction period, and then there's also the finished infrastructure of these.
Right.
Water.
Right.
See, I
Would it help if I ask Dunya, my daughter, so she's a civil engineer in sustainability who goes through all this stuff. Like if you have questions, just I'll write them down and ask her all at once. But would it help if I ask her for a list of what the project, what is entailed exactly during construction? Just a comprehensive list of everything required
It's a great idea. Yeah.
yeah, we can take a
by
look
the
at that.
developer or the actual project.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see that, and it would be very informative for us as a committee. I'm wondering. I imagine I could feel already that there would be more pushback about how things were done during construction, and so I think it would be good to see that list and then pick the priorities like we're doing to say, this is what we really need to happen or not happen during construction. But otherwise, I could see developers getting the feeling like they don't want to be, that now they're working with contractors and they're overseeing contractors and all of this.
Well, the difference is, it's the difference between, Suffolk County and New York City, and they've got really strict guidelines. I don't know if those guidelines are eventually going to move in our direction. I hope so. They don't have a lot of time in New York City where they have to be, fossil fuel less.
Right.
So they're running, they're running short on time. But I'll ask her now, see if we can get an answer from her tonight.
Lovely. Yeah, I mean, no worries.
Right.
Yeah,
It's okay.
anytime between now and
Might get it.
in the next meeting. Okay, very good. So
For the moment, might it be helpful in the construction phase, to have to kind of cap it with a phrase, something, along the lines of, best practices for mitigating particulate matter runoff and best practices for zero waste to the landfill.
Okay. All right, so that would that would cover quite a bit that we've talked about in the during construction. Erosion control, so that would cover that. Now this site remediation as opposed to land removal. I'm not understanding the
Yeah.
meaning there. Is that Amal? Is that
Is that me?
You right.
Oh dear.
no? It's okay. Did you write site remediation as opposed to land removal?
Yes, as in do whatever you can with whatever you've got as opposed to clear cutting. Yeah.
Okay, so so sort of this retention of green, the green material, trees, shrubs, and
Yeah.
whatnot, as opposed to clearing and okay.
As
That
in,
might
if
actually
you
go
can-
up in the landscaping.
If you can work
That's the whole
rather
Something like discourage clear cutting.
I don't know. I don't know if it goes under landscaping because it would be in the
it's not.
developmental,
During
with-
construction.
yeah,
I'm talking
or
about during construction.
pre-construction, it's the design phase. Oh, should we make another subject, a design phase subject as well?
No, I think that
Or-
that a lot of the all of the building infrastructure and the green
Or- yeah, sorry.
landscaping would be in the design phase.
It could go in infrastructure. I'm not, yeah. Sorry.
Rebecca, when you get out a building permit, there's a whole section on stormwater runoff and how you are responsible for that.
Mhm.
Okay, matter of fact, it's a part of the bond that you put up when you do decide to build something.
Right.
Okay, matter of fact, my next door neighbor put up a whole brick wall and it collapsed.
Mhm.
And cleaning that up off the street was deducted from his bond that he put up for
Right.
building. So he very clearly didn't do what he needed to do in
Right.
order to protect that stormwater. But you are supposed to do it, and it is a part of the building code. When you decide to build something, that you have to retain the water runoff and the dirt runoff that can occur from a storm. We've had that happen coming down Myrtle Avenue, okay,
Right.
during the storm. And these are things that you are supposed to, prepare for and take every measure to prevent from happening.
Absolutely, right. So as you've just said, there's a lot already in the code that the planning department, and the building department will enforce regarding stormwater runoff.
Right.
I think it's,
And the dirt runoff is a big problem as well. You
Right.
get huge mudslides.
Right, and so that's the particulate matter, mitigating particulate matter. I guess this would be stormwater runoff.
Getting them to enforce that is what needs to be done.
Sure. And as always,
what they-
with everything in the village, if you see something, you can call code. If it's not an immediate issue, there's the new resident portal. Has anyone used that yet? If you go on portjeff.com, I think it's the second sort of slide through that pops up. And it's a portal where, if there's a big tree limb on your street, or, you see stormwater runoff, you can submit it as a ticket, and there's more accountability because it's trackable. It's not you sent an email and, you got one back from this person, but they said to contact that. It will get routed more efficiently, theoretically.
Great.
So
That's great. I see it.
yeah,
Under
so
emergency management?
maybe.
No, yeah. No. This is just runoff. What about huge chunks of asphalt from the berms that were put up that end up in our sewage systems?
Right. Yeah, so anything I would say,
Yeah.
submit it there. All right, so we're doing pretty well during construction. So maybe sort of an overarching thing here is the best practices for mitigating particulate matter, stormwater runoff, and zero or minimal waste to landfill. And then maybe we can sort of have sub items to that. Does that sound good for during construction for now?
Yeah.
Okay, so move up to building infrastructure. So let's see. So we've discussed the roofs. Is that high, mid, or low priority?
Well, roofs are up high, so.
I think that should be high priority because it's not a difficult, it's not a complicated ask.
Right.
And they just need a little bit of thinking to do it correctly. It's not hugely expensive. It's just a little bit of thought here would make a difference.
It's
Okay.
during the building, the design phase, it's, you know, rather than fitting it retroactively, right? They're already, something's got to go up there anyway.
Exactly. Okay, so we'll leave that there for now. We have include requirements for dark sky. So these highlighted in green are sort of what we talked about as like it's a binary ask. It's a you have it or you don't have it. So we have the dark skies compliant lighting. We have charging stations or mobile charging options for electric cars, I'm guessing, Kelly?
Do we have anything about permeable paving?
I don't think so.
Rather
We
than
had,
having,
I
yeah.
had put the permeable paving, Rebecca. I think I had as a compound sentence that got
Okay.
stuck in the language.
Oh, stuck in okay, very good. So when we go through there, we can pop it into infrastructure. Perfect. All right, so we have charging stations for electric vehicles, require new buildings to abide by the American Bird Conservancy's bird-friendly glass ordinances. And then recycling we put at the bottom. So does anyone want to shift any of these as far as, you know, ranking 1 through 5 priorities? Does anyone want to add anything, comment?
Good.
Well, I think actually with the exception that Heather pointed out about the composting, all of these other things are pretty low asks, and things like with the charging stations that would make their buildings more attractive and actually add value.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this is a very reasonable list, you know, for now. We might have to, as a group, why don't we all, or as individuals, why don't we all look into the Bird Conservancy's bird-friendly glass and see maybe if there's, you know, there's like a part of that we want to pull out, or, you know, how we can incorporate that into being an ask that they, you know, that any developer would say, okay, you know, we can do this much. So instead of diving into that right now at the last 10 minutes, if we could all do that before the next meeting. So why don't we give landscaping a shot? All right, so we have defining a preference for native plants or trees as part of the 10% greenscape within parking lots. And Kelly provides an article. So that seems, so like Kelly was saying, sort of, you know, how do we say what, you know, do we want 100% natives? Do we want, you know, a certain percent, you know, I think we'll come back to that number maybe after reading through. But that is an important distinction. Establishing a list of native street trees for use in the village based on tree species that perform well. So this, I think, I wonder if we would specifically list a number of street trees to suggest, as opposed to just saying any native trees, you know, in the guidelines, or if we said, you know, here are 6 street trees that work really well in Port Jefferson and they should be considered for your parking lot.
I think being very specific might be helpful.
I think so.
I don't know if we wanted to look to select from those New York City street trees, which is to say we could pull out, like you said, maybe 6 to 10 that we think would work really well in Port Jefferson.
Right.
Do you want me to ask that question? I can go to, I've been talking to the Cornell Cooperative about other stuff. Do you want me to ask them for suggestions?
Sure, yeah. Anybody who wants to work on that list, you know, between Cornell Cooperative, and then Will provided us with a link here to identify which street trees are native, maybe which ones are characteristic of Port Jefferson already. Having a variety of street trees that would work well in different different scenarios, trees that would be right next to a road, trees that are sort of in, off to the side somewhere. Because a street tree sort of in the island of a parking lot is maybe something, that could be larger than something that's going to be immediately adjacent to a sidewalk or a street. So definitely want to give variety.
And Susan brings up a good point that I had also read about in a separate article, that trees that are planted in those kinds of street areas, if that same tree were just in a wooded area, it would have a significantly longer life. So there is a lot of stress and therefore, maintenance. So this might be a place where we're looking for the adaptability of the tree for that setting.
Yeah.
Imagine that they have landscapers that might be sensitive to, to that, in terms of where the wind's coming in. So if they've got a selection of trees, they've got a starting point, but at the end of the day, presumably they've got a professional that can.
Yeah, large projects always have some kind of landscape designer. And so it's more about giving them the some kind of directive that says we're looking for native trees. We're not just looking for ginkgos and things that don't have much ecological value locally. All right, so protect steep slopes. Say that 3 times fast. In Midtown by enacting steep slopes ordinance. So this is also very important, but I think, that's probably why I wrote action item next to it. This would be another thing that the CAC would do, and in fact, the building department has encouraged the CAC to look into steep slope codes and proposing, workshopping and proposing some kind of steep slope code, because it's again, you would codify this, just like we were speaking about, other things that are or could be codified. This is outside of this project, but also very important. I'm gonna just put a cross through, but I'll leave it here so that, and I'm actually gonna bold it so we don't forget about it. Allow for permeable hardscaping and incorporation of bioswales. So here we're talking about the permeable hardscaping and bioswales. Yeah, I guess is it infrastructure or is it green, landscaping when it's permeable?
Well, you could break it up. You could break up the permeable landscaping, or I mean the hardscaping rather, the permeable.
Yeah.
And I guess just in general, I think we'd encourage them to minimize the amount of hardscaping. So it's kind of like both minimizing the hardscaping and making what hardscaping is unavoidable permeable.
Yeah, car park.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
I like that.
So
I guess just to clarify, I guess this is hardscaping that's open to the air, which is to say, like if it was a parking garage, I don't know what constitutes hardscaping. I don't know at what point it becomes like an interior plaza or something, but I think they'll understand what we mean.
Yeah, minimum hardscaping and
Isn't permeable landscape, hardscaping usually
You're gonna
on
minimize
top
it,
of
it's
grass
minimize
or, it's
impermeable.
not in a building.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's like in your driveway or something,
right.
Yeah, or sidewalks and stuff.
or a sidewalk, yeah.
So
Yeah, I like the way that's worded, Rebecca.
thank you. So minimize hardscaping and design for permeable paving where possible.
I would say,
Mhm. You might also add that if anything is coming down, that material might be reused within the hardscaping.
It's possible, yeah. I know there are neat technologies with that. I think no, Kelly sent me something about recycling glass into sand, which was really cool as well. But I know sometimes they'll crumble up glass and put it into concrete for sidewalks, and it makes them kind of
Mhm.
sparkly, which is nice. We could use a little.
Maybe that should be a separate category.
What's that?
Well, sort of
Prettiness.
saving certain materials for recycling them, but
Reuse,
making the
upcycling.
environment better, to make the
Yes,
environment.
I think we have the during construction, we talked about reuse or recycling of building materials.
Mhm.
So that's sketched in there, and Kelly had said that in Town of Brookhaven is looking into that quite a bit. So we might have some useful leads. We don't have to
Put it in there, yeah.
invent the wheel, but yeah, no, that sounds like that's a priority for the committee here.
Just like big
Um,
picture, maybe just sorry, in terms of the landscaping section, I guess, just to make sure I can understand the priorities. So the priorities are basically, we want to reduce the amount of hardscaping. We want, and we want vegetation, preferably native. Are there other considerations? Like, I have a feeling like these are all different ways of making sure that we end up with something that's not impermeable and has green trees. Is everything kind of a version of that? Or are there other considerations?
I think that's a big chunk of it.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, it's pretty much like,
There's kind of like two rule, like in that sense, like we might be able to boil these down to like two statements, one having to do with impermeable surfaces, which we kind of addressed. And then this other is like vegetation, like what percentage, and we want it to be native, but at some level it's like, comes down to like, we're requesting that they maintain a certain percentage of green space in the project or something.
yeah, and well, so of that, each zone has its own clearing limits. And so the clearing limits will say what percentage of the property must remain vegetated, and the uncleared, whatever percentage that is, it doesn't mean it's already clear in the planning guidelines that vegetated does not mean grass. Vegetated does
Right.
not mean arborvitaes. Vegetated means it's a more natural, multi-story, established or designed to be an established ecosystem, as opposed to, again, just like a lawn with a tree in it does not count as your vegetated area.
Right. It sounds like some of that's already in the planning documents. I guess I'm wondering, given that there are already rules on cover, I guess our contribution, I guess, is to emphasize that we want native species over non-native species. That seems like that would be sort of a marginal addition to the existing code.
Yes.
But we don't, in some sense, I don't know whether it would be redundant to say something about cover and have that be a different percentage that's already allowed for in the planning documents. You know what I mean? If they've already been given a percentage of vegetation from the planning documents, I don't know if this other part of the code, we want to have a different percentage. In some sense, because the percentages have already been laid out, I wonder whether we should just leave that alone and then focus on what comprises that percentage and put a focus on native trees.
Yes, you're absolutely right that we don't have to, we don't even have to echo the clearing limits, because again, with every zone, every different zone in the village, there's the professional office zone has a different clearing limit than residential, than commercial. But I think the 10% greenscape within parking lots, is that, I don't know, is that something that we're suggesting? Is that something that's already in the architectural guideline? I don't remember.
Yes, that is already in the architectural guideline, and it's just that flat, that it's just 10% green space without any further definition.
Very good. Thank you, Kelly. So yeah, I think the percentage that we're looking at here is within the cleared space. If you're building a parking lot, you must have 10% of the space in the parking lot be vegetated somehow, so that it's not just the sea of asphalt. And so now we're talking about, all right, of that 10%, how much of that in the parking lot has to be native? And then we can also talk about, of whatever whatever landscaping is planned. So maybe that already, maybe we don't have to say the parking lots are separate. Maybe we would just say of the landscaping that is planned for the site, what percentage should be native. And then they could, if they're having trouble finding a native tree that works really well in the middle of a parking lot, then maybe that's part of their non-native percentage, but
And
otherwise.
does this count? Is it 10% throughout? Like, let's say the parking lot goes below ground and it's got 3 levels above ground. So it's a total of a 4-story parking lot, or 3 stories and 4 levels. Is it 10% of that whole that's already in the guidelines?
Are you referring to like a basement type or?
Well, yeah, if you had, so let's say, yeah, you're below ground and you hit ground level, and then I don't know, maybe it has two more levels. Let's say it's a 4. I don't even know if they're permitted to do that in the village. I have no idea.
Well, then there wouldn't be any green space there because there wouldn't even be any sunlight that would be able to get to those places.
But in which case you would have 4 solid layers of asphalt. That's what I was questioning. Green space within the parking lot. So primarily like surrounding the parking lot, or just
Or on the top
perimeter.
level, like the question would be like, yeah, then if the top level of that parking deck is exposed, whether we would hope that there would be some kind of.
I think that would be a very
Well,
specific case where the planning board would be looking at, okay, how do we apply that to that? I think the Port Jefferson Village doesn't have any parking structures as of now. Maybe in the future, and so that would be a question that they would, the planning board would discuss. At the end of the day, these are guidelines, and so. If it's 10% of greenscape within parking lots, they're saying, oh well, maybe if they're building a parking deck, they're investing in that as opposed to knocking down more, creating more impermeable space, and so we can go ahead, Kelly.
Well, I think is it helpful then to separate out parking fields, which are just tarmac over ground level, and garages or decks, which would have a different, because under building garages obviously aren't going to have any sunlight availability, so they're not. Parking decks, I could see, and maybe this does actually fit into this. One of the alternatives discussed for Mather, clearing out the forest to create a very large parking field, is to have a parking deck where the parking is multi-level and a smaller footprint, therefore having less clearance of the existing woods. So it might be interesting to create those 2 different types of parking definitions, a parking field versus a parking deck. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, and in fact, perhaps, if the committee wants to encourage parking decks, or, make a statement about which one is more environmentally friendly. The issue always with parking decks is that they're expensive, but also it provides if a building is having trouble creating enough parking in a certain footprint, or maybe they can have more building as a result of densifying their parking, or whatever the trade-off is. Yeah,
exactly. There are advantages. I don't know. I guess we seem to comprehend them, but we could point out the advantages of a parking deck. And I recently saw one where the entire perimeter did have vegetation, even though everything sat primarily in shade. It's just vegetation that does well in shade, but it created a whole wall of green space, so that both from the inside and the outside, it's much more attractive. Being that much more attractive, they were, made the building itself more attractive. So if it's a matter of living space, well, maybe that will assist in, getting people to buy or rent that space. I think almost everything we've done so far is there not just to improve, but I mean, it would make the village overall that much more attractive. There's nothing cool about, like you said, a field of asphalt. And when you get out on it in the middle of summer, it's painful. But if you're in a parking deck where there is vegetation around you and you're not burning because you're under the sun or whatever, there's just a massive difference. And there's a difference. It also, that cools that, by the way, the reason they were doing that is that it helped cool the parking lot.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, if, and I wonder if this is this might get this question, maybe we kick it over to the building infrastructure. As far as parking is concerned, these things are all related, obviously. In one way
I think
or
that
another.
I guess it in terms of things that might get kicked over to the I don't know, the architecture people, but the other possibility, not the other possibility, but avoiding asphalt parking lots in terms of this heat island effect, I think is another way to think about if it's made of concrete or, there's other materials that, okay, it's still, it's not as good as a forest. But in terms of dealing with that heat island effect, there might be some ways of dealing with more reflective surfaces, kind of like we were talking about with the roofs.
Right.
If they didn't need as much, I totally agree with you that there's a general preference for parking decks. I think that they address a lot of problems all at once. But if it's just a small little area, avoiding asphalt at least deals with the heat island issue.
Sure.
But I would say in terms of the landscaping, like you said, because the percentages are kind of dealt with already in the code, maybe our task is really just to say how much native plantings do we think is feasible to request. And I think that number should be high, but it seems like we don't have that many knobs to turn. Like we know we want natives, more than 3/4 native. I don't know, but we don't have that many things that we can ask them to do because in terms of the percentages, that's all dealt with elsewhere in the code.
Sorry, I'm so new to everything. When you say already dealt with in the code, it means it's there in perpetuity. I mean, that 10% can't increase to 15 or 20% or anything. Well,
I'm just saying that I think I was just trying to avoid having different numbers in different parts of the code. And if the percentage of vegetation that's required to be kept is actually sitting somewhere else in the code, we don't want to
create a discrepancy.
Okay, exactly. So I'm just thinking that it seems that it's the makeup of the vegetation, how much vegetation seems to be dealt with elsewhere. The makeup of the vegetation seems to be the one thing that we might add as to how much do you think that we could actually request as native. I don't know how much is native now. I'm expecting that left to their own devices, almost none of it's native. Requesting that 2/3 of it is native, would be huge and still leave a lot of wiggle room for them to deal with, sticky spots that for whatever reason they need a ginkgo tree there or something.
Why 2/3? Why not 100%? I mean, if we're going to ask. I mean, I'm just wondering why 2/3? Why can't we just say 100% native? So is there an advantage or a disadvantage?
When creating these, part of the task is saying what is not going to get a lot of pushback from, we obviously, not having any of these things would be the least amount of pushback and make developers the most happy because it's fewer guidelines. But what asks are the most we're trying to be reasonable but still firm as far as saying, it is very reasonable to have this percentage of natives in your planting, in your planting plan. If they go above that, they're doing something the village would really like. And if they know if they go below that number, that they haven't there's no actual list of boxes to check, but they haven't been able to say to the village, look, your guidelines said you wanted at least this, and we have done that. And so I think I wonder if there's precedent to look at in other codes, other guidelines that exist out there to land on that number. But my gut feeling is to have it be higher than 50%, but lower than 100%, so that
I thought 100% might be easier for them because so many, I mean, a lot of our nurseries, I don't know where they bring things in from, but a lot of them are dealing with so much native, material that it might be easier for them to just go, I'll take that, and that. I don't know how this goes. Also, I mean, this sort of thing, I wonder, is someone at the end, does someone actually go, oh, that's not quite 2/3? Does building code or whomever come along after the fact or
that's all done.
Actually check.
It'd be even before they would get to a nursery, before it gets to building code or inspection, they're looking at the plan. So there's, professional
part of the
plans that are part of the assessment. And so you would look and say, okay, and if the landscape designer is trying to meet this guideline, they would surely have a note, that says, 2/3 of these plants are native, and you would be able to look at the plan and see, what they've planned for, and then their contractors would go out and get whatever plants were necessary. I think, they can always do more than the percentage that's requested of the guideline. But again, I think having something where a landscape designer looks at it and says, you know what, I can work with that, as opposed to 100% where now they're struggling to find a native plant that works well in the middle of a parking lot, or in this shady, dry, whatever, section. Actually, there's
okay.
So I put a link in the chat to other native plant ordinances, and I was just sort of scrolling through. They seem to actually be between 30 and the biggest I see here is 75% in terms of what. So they separate some of these, like Lee County says 75% native trees, 50% native required for shrub and ground cover. So they distinguish there. So that gives us we can
Work
look
off
through
that model.
those. Yeah.
So
And I like that distinction. I mean, I do think that it's easier to find native trees than it might be to find native ground covers.
yeah.
So we might be able to push the tree limit like they did higher than and maybe be a little bit more forgiving for things like ground cover, which can be kind of difficult. So I like that. I mean, I think 75% trees, I think that's a good starting point.
That's a good percentage. Those.
Yeah, and that would apply to whether it's in the parking lot, whether it's in front, by the entrance, by, whatever. That I think that's a good, just a good overall plan.
I don't know whether in addition to that, I'm happy to just leave it as that, but I'll raise, whether we would just say that we strongly recommend against planting species that be considered invasive or aggressive. I don't know, like there are lists, like New York State.
Sure.
Because it might be, I don't want them planting a bunch of, multiflora rose or something like,
Right.
Even if there's more or less bad non-native. So I don't know. I'll see if I can find a list of ones that we would really just want them to avoid.
Avoid plants on New York State.
Is that something you're looking for from us, Rebecca? I mean, lists of native, vegetation as opposed to trees that might work, or is just the language itself sufficient?
I think with and committee can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the conversation is sort of rounded out to keeping it a simpler language instead of listing specific trees or specific anything. Just, give them, say, you have this much running room, you have up, the whatever native trees you find that work for you, that's better than the non-native trees. And so if everyone's comfortable with that, I think that's good. Yeah. And then referencing, I know there is some kind of link with New York State ongoing list of invasives, bamboo,
English ivy, all that kind of stuff.
All of it. And so saying, none of that. We could, and when we circle back on this document, we can fine tune the language. Is it avoid? Is it prohibit? Is it, all of these things. Okay, everyone's, we're getting a lot of great stuff done here. So I think that the bioswales is separate from just the general plantings.
Now I'll just say that these I think are really hard to do correctly. So it's not that I don't think that they're important, but I think there's a lot of thought that would go into making them effective. So I don't know if I would like 100% trust. They have to really want them to work. I guess what I'm saying, they can put something that they call a rain garden, but if it's not actually, the hydrology is not working, it's not actually a rain garden.
Sure,
Well,
sure.
well, then, Heather, could we say, I know this seems a little weaselly, but again, trying to give them room, strongly consider bioswales and rain gardens where appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's
I think
perfect.
that's better. Yeah.
Let's see. So
I'd love to see them in action. It's easy for them to like point at a collection of plants and be like, look, it's a terrain garden. You're like, no,
right.
it's not. It's a garden.
Right.
We try.
As Rebecca has pointed out, the Barnum parking lot, while it's sad to see the trees go, it does seem as though they did a fairly decent job in terms of their planting.
Yeah, they did incorporate a proper bioswale there, it would seem. So, it's possible. The thing about projects that would be looking at lists like this is they do have the engineers, they have the landscaping firms. It's not this list. While we will welcome all homeowners to look at it, this isn't. You're redoing your driveway, and now you get all this whole list of things. So. These are the firms that already have people working to design things and hopefully know about these things, or maybe they'll learn. So, alrighty. The reuse of plant matter, we should bump that up, and then so this we covered in our discussion, and I think we're almost done with this first round. If everyone wants to hang on for another 5 minutes, maybe we just want to go through. I think this is Susan's list, and see what is applicable to this document and which things we want to sort of. I think I'm going to take from here and make another document that is CAC future projects or future things to look at. So I think I'm seeing a lot. So why don't we just do that now?
And like you said, for these big projects, fortunately, the landscapers, I think, will be kind of savvy to some of these plant selection issues in a way that homeowners might not be, but a professional landscape designer would be.
Yes. So this is the document of things for the CAC to think about in the future. So anything that's not finding its way in this document, we can not forget about. So let's see. So tree selection, we said we would kind of leave that up to, a little wiggle room. Is there sufficient space to grow to maturity? Oh, I see. So this is all sort of under a tree selection category. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it might be useful when you're giving the kids the trees, when you're doing that
Yes. Yeah.
Arbor Day thing.
So do you mind if I copy this out of
move
here?
it.
And perfect. So let's that, and then let's put it over here. And that's a great thing to have. Thank you for putting those questions together.
And the steep slope needs to go into the other doc as well, right?
Yeah, that's the first thing right here. Oh no, that's runoff. Thanks, Kelly. Where did that go?
Okay.
Here we go. Action item. Okay, cool. And that's one. All right, excellent. I'll look through and make sure we didn't miss anything else as well. I do think having some, a little bit of language about diversity amongst the species as well could be good. What does everyone think about that?
It's important.
My sense is that these projects are relatively small. I mean, any one project it would be hard to both achieve high diversity and hard to completely ruin things with low diversity, because in some sense they're not vast and I don't know, in the scope of things. They couldn't by themselves have a meaningful impact in reducing diversity. They could make it higher if they were choosing kind of exotic species,
What?
but we were trying to get them to choose native species. So
Yeah,
we're kind of moving them
you-
towards a specific set of trees. So in some sense, hopefully they're not really increasing diversity that much, because actually we really want them just picking from trees we already have.
Yeah.
Don't want all one species, which is what they're going to do. They're going to say, oh, look, that's a nice one. Just get 20 of them, because that is going to give you, if there's a disease or something, it's just going to kill off the whole lot.
Yeah, I think what the point Susan made is about the diversity on that lot itself. And like she's saying, if you get a blight, then does that knock out half of the trees that you designed into the project?
Do you think the landscape designers would be savvy to that though? Just because that kind of, that would seem like something that they
that's
would.
what they do. That is what they do. But that brings up another point, which is if the trees do fall due, whatever, due to wind, weather, blight, replanting.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I don't know what keeps them
responsible
from
for-
maintaining them.
Let's say they, the developer says, well, they all died and that's that. Forgot to water them, whatever.
Oh no, yeah, there's already when these big projects happen, they have the planning board requires a certain number of guarantee on the planting, so a number of years. So there's usually like a 2 or 3 year guarantee. And then I don't, beyond that, I don't think the developer would hate natives so much that they, after the 3 year guarantee, pull them out and replace them and say that they died or something. It would be a bizarre turn of events. So I guess not.
Okay. I guess what I'm thinking of is, let's say there's a storm and something's occurred. I feel like native or not, would they be I'm just wondering, are they responsible for ensuring that something be there? That whatever they started with, even if it's not exactly the same thing, but if in spot X there was vegetation and it disappears due to whatever reason, do they have to replant tree, ground cover, whatever it is or was?
I don't have an exact answer.
Or at that point, can they asphalt over it? Yeah, that's
no, they
concern.
can't just asphalt over things, because that's that would be a something that then has to go through the building and planning department. No, it's not like they could be like, oh, whoops, that acre of forest just all fell down and now we're going to extend our parking lot. That's absolutely not. If we're talking about like one tree or one bush, I don't know that that's gonna come up on the radar. But if they're doing a big, if there's a project that ensues because of the vegetation that died and they're making it a non-vegetated area, then no, that's not going to fly.
They can't do. That's already somewhere in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
if
they planted
increase-
a wall of green, let's say, and that should die for whatever reason, are they required to replace it with another wall of green?
I know within a couple of years, yes, of the project, and then thereafter, I think that's beyond the scope of these guidelines.
Is it? 'Cause isn't it kind of the same thing? I mean, I guess the idea is the health of the village, the health of the environment. So if the tree dies within a few years and nothing is there to replace it, are we
Right.
kind of back where we were?
Well, so these are design guidelines. So these are sort of, planning, pre-construction, during construction, and then what happens after construction is something that's,
Post-construction, okay.
That would be
yeah,
good.
but post-construction is not,
Maintenance.
yeah, I mean, that's something the CAC is welcome to explore, the code and, what is
Are
in the
there
code.
maintenance guidelines? There must be.
I'm sure in some senses, yes. We could always have our special attorney for the planning department come and speak to us about specific things in the future that she's incredibly knowledgeable about and will be happy to discuss with us. But I already hear her answer in my head that this, the maintenance would be outside of the design guidelines task. But a good thing to think about for the future if you want to, and that might actually fall under the tree code, which, we're still trying to chip away at, because that's more about percentages and coverages and all of this. All right, so the leaf blowers are going to move to an insect control. We're going to move to the CAC's other things to look at in the future. That sounds like everyone was very excited about those. So we will do that. And we can kind of come back to talking about if we want to put in any language about diversity of the plantings. But for now, I want to congratulate everyone on the fact that we have 3 concise lists from this document.
I have to jump off, but I'm feeling very good
Yes.
about our progress. So yeah,
Good.
thanks for
Yes, I definitely want. We
doing all the
were
taping.
half hour over, and so I will make sure everyone has this document. I had to make a copy out of the one that you're all working on because my whatever I'm logged in with didn't have access. But this is really great. I thank you all for your work to get it to this point and conversation, and look forward to next meeting where we will continue refining this. So any work you want to do between now and then to fill in any gaps or do any research, precedent, links, and that, feel free to send it around.
What did you need from us
What's
other
the date of the next
than the
meeting?
bird friendly glass? You wanted us to.
We have we spoke about the Brookhaven language that might be accessible as far as construction material reuse. We talked about finding the link to the invasive species list for New York State, for like essentially a no plant list, and including the formal name of that list in there. And then the next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, the 15th of March. I might ask if it's possible, if no one else has a conflict on the 8th of March, to move it there. If that's.
I can't do the 15th, so.
You can't do the 15th either. Is the 8th okay with folks?
Oh, I
Okay.
got the 22nd.
The 22nd, I will be overseas.
The
so will
8th is good for me so
Yeah.
far.
Very
So-
good. All right.
Okay,
So why don't we
March
stay?
8th.
Tuesday, March 8th.
And we'll
7.
stay virtual for now. That works for everybody.
Mhm.
And 7
yes.
o'clock. Perfect. So we'll do
Oh,
March
I guess
8th.
yeah. Go ahead, I'm
Was it,
sorry.
Sabrina?
Oh, I just wanted to remind people about the volunteer recognition dinner. It's coming up on March 30th.
Did everyone receive an invite there?
Mm-hmm.
What Mary sent us, that's all.
Mary sent,
Yeah.
yeah.
I sent it, but
Very good.
have to RSVP
Probably do it.
before the 23rd of March, just so everyone
Is there
knows.
food options? Are there food options at this, or is it just a set meal? Do you know?
I
That's
don't
a
know.
really good question.
I don't know
I
what,
have- Yeah, I can't eat, so I've got so many food allergies at the moment.
Okay. Well, if you eat before and join us, or if you want to email email myself, and I can forward it to Barbara with that question. It'd be great to see everyone and help recognize your hard work. Showing up to these meetings every month is really, it's time, it's effort. We put time in between, but it's this effort that really makes a big difference in the village, in this case environmentally, which we all really appreciate. If it weren't for concerned citizens like you, we might still be more in the Stone Ages. So So thank you all. And yeah, I hope to see you at the dinner there. And
Rebecca, will I be able to, because I have questions still. Do we stay here or do we
hold on,
need-
I'm gonna say, here, I'll say goodbye to everyone and
Right, I have to
officially
say
end our
too.
meeting. So
Okay,
Amal, I'll
good
hang out
night.
for a second. Good night.